Welcome back to the Glow Up Girl podcast. I'm Kyra. All right, I'm so excited to welcome Paula into the podcast. Welcome, Paula.
Hey, Kyra, so lovely to meet you, my dear.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get started with you telling anyone out there listening and watching who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks so much. My name is Paula Conroy. I am a mother to two little kids who are about to turn 10 and 8, and a wife to my beautiful husband. I grew up in South Africa for most of my life until I left to live in the UK for a number of years. And after 7 years in London, I moved across to Australia. So I've been living in Australia now for just over 13 years. And I live in a beautiful little town in Australia called Byron Bay. So for any of the listeners out there, if you haven't been to Australia before, I highly recommend coming to visit this beautiful little town of Byron Bay, which is, beautifully tropical and natural and gorgeous and pristine and gorgeous waters and amazing forest terrain. So yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful place to live in the world. And I feel very fortunate to have found myself here at this point in my life.
Awesome. I love it. All right. Well, let's start because I'm excited to talk about this topic today. Really, you're going to help us to unlock our inner feminine leadership. And so I want to start by having you talk about the typical, masculine and feminine traits first.
Yeah, perfect. So, a bit of context around the leadership piece for me is that I work very deeply in the space of rites of passage. And what that means is working with people to support people to transition through a rite of passage from one stage of life to the next in a really healthy way. I've been in this work now, this particular work, for about 3 years. But prior to that, I was a senior leader in corporate banking for 15 years. And I led multi-jurisdictional teams and managed a big balance sheet and, looked after, many, many, many clients. And so I grew up, in inverted commas, in the banking system, learning how to lead according to that system and that structure. Um, Internally, however, towards the sort of end of my career there was definitely what I call the knock on the inside, this knock on my front door, saying, "Hey, this is not where you're meant to be, and this is not what it's all about. There's something different that you need to go and discover for yourself in order to be able to come back and articulate what needs to change in order for this system that is geared towards more, bigger, better, faster." Utilizing all the employees as kind of resources that have just got endless capacity to work harder, to work deeper, to work more, less time off, less balance, less well-being, and we can see that evidence through the whole globe when we have a look at how many people are struggling with mental health issues and, feeling disenfranchised in their lives and feeling unsatisfied. So, the journey that we're on collectively is from this place that's not aligned to the values that all of us, perhaps, I would love to identify with, which include, balance and harmony and, contribution and being in service and, running beautiful families or homes or however it is. Like, all of us are seeking for that level of consciousness or that level of consistency. And our system's just not geared to support us to do that. So, for me as a person who grew up in that industry, I realized now, subsequently, since I left, how steeped in the masculine traits of leadership the systems are. And since I've stepped out of that and gone on this rite of passage for myself, this journey from that way of living and that way of being and being highly identified in that structure and with that job and with that, perceived status and all the things that come with that kind of a job and that kind of a position, to then turn away from that and go through this necessary rite of passage that internally I was called to do, to discover for myself, hey, what does it actually mean to be a female leader? What does it mean to have a female leader around the table? And this is leading on to responding to your question now, which is that it became very evident to me that there are these different traits that live within all of us, and men and women and everybody in between. We've all got this spectrum of traits or gender traits that live within each of us. And so on the one side, we have typically very masculine traits, being, very structured and very ordered and coming up with a plan and building a linear solution to the problem that we're faced with. Right, here's the problem. Let's do this and then this and then this, and then we're going to have a solution, which is a highly important, very valuable, strategic way to think. And it's got its place for sure. But what I realized was that within that structure, within the corporate structure that I was in for so long, it's the only place, it's the only way in which we're being taught. We're not being taught about this more cyclical, more fluid way of the feminine that is kind of almost as if you could picture a tree growing up in a linear way from the ground, and then you picture all of the seasons cycling around it every year, year after year after year. As the seasons cycle around the tree continues to grow up in a linear and down in a linear way. And this remembrance of these cyclical patterns that are happening for us all the time, and being able to drop into a flow that includes the spring and the summer, as well as the autumn and the winter. Whereas our corporate structure is like, right, we've got to continuously be planting and growing and bigger and better and faster, and make sure we're reaping the harvest. And it's always got to be profit at whatever cost. And we've always got to be on this upward trajectory. And yet nature itself is showing us that actually us as a part of nature, human beings as a part of nature, have got a very different way of operating. We need to go through the rest and digest phases of the winter and the autumn to let the things that need to fall off and disappear, so that we have the opportunity to plant the new seeds in whatever fertile bed we're talking about, So this beautifully very feminine trait, Mother Nature herself is very feminine. This planet that we live on, this beautiful earth, is very feminine in nature. And, we've forgotten that connection to all of the wisdom that she holds, that the feminine holds, in this over-identification that we've had with our masculine traits of getting stuff done. So yeah, so this is this sort of spectrum, and just to be super clear for all the listeners that when we talk about these masculine and feminine traits, we're not talking about men and women or anybody in between. We're talking about traits that are typically associated with those with the masculine or the feminine. So they all live in all of us. Every single person, men, women, and everybody in between, has got these traits that live within us, and it's our call to explore now these traits that perhaps we're super familiar and identified with, ones that we've been operating from and with for a very long period of time. But there's this whole spectrum of traits to be embodied and explored and unpacked to support us in this moving along of this journey that we're collectively on to a better way of being within ourselves, a better state of well-being within ourselves and within our communities.
Yeah, I thank you so much for explaining that, because we do live in a world where it's just go, 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 get it done, and even when you talk about like working maybe in the corporate space, like I notice most times we're like go, 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 and then there's never like that reflection period to like take a step back and see, okay, oh, it went really well. I really like encourage my team all the time to like, let's just talk about like how it went. Let's talk about how we want, let's celebrate where we were really good. Let's talk about how we could be better before we just like drop that, get it done and move on to the next thing. Because it's almost like, you're not reflecting, but you're also not like really learning anything. You're also not giving yourself a chance to just like breathe, because you're just like on to the next. And it's another thing, that we see with entrepreneurs. It's what's often called like the hustle culture. It's like, I got to work, I got to do it, because if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And, and it's just that, and it's around the clock, and that leads you burn out really easily on that. And then there's no time for reflection, because most times entrepreneurs, they're solopreneurs. So they're always working around the clock by themselves, and they're never taking that time to like think about like, what didn't work. Why didn't that work? And so it's just on to the next, and you're just like burning out because you're just trying to do stuff all the time.
Yeah, yeah, Kara, I totally hear you on that. And I mean, you've built yourself an incredibly successful network and business and have probably lived that experience as many of the listeners have, as I have, as well as I've built my business. And this is part of this experiment, so to say, this experiential experiment of how is it that we can work out how to shift the way in which this momentum that's in our collective psyche and our collective consciousness can shift, and it's almost as though if we think of like, one little part of the wave trying to go in a different direction, but the whole wave is moving in one direction. It's like kind of succumb and surrender and succumb and surrender. And this is why I appreciate, what you've done with Glow Up Girl is because, these types of conversations and these types of messages getting out to people really supports the other little droplets in the wave to go, wow, I actually am going to investigate and explore ways in which I can actually seek to change this momentum that is actually carrying me without me choosing to be carried. And I actually want to choose to do this in a different way. I want to choose to go slower. When I watch what Mother Nature does in her cycles, she goes slowly through her cycle. And, we've got all these cycles that are happening in us all the time. We breathe in and we breathe out, and that's a cycle. We go through a day into a night, and that's a cycle. We go from a winter into a spring, and that's a cycle. There's, a cycle that happens in women's bodies or those that have a womb every month of, this possibility of life being created. And then that, if that doesn't come to fruition, then that gently dying off. So, there are these cycles that are around us all the time, and yet we somehow have excluded ourselves from the natural order of things and put ourselves into this momentum of this wave of more, bigger, better, faster. And we're all experiencing the challenge as a result of how we've collectively landed up here. So how do we transition then from this momentum that we've been on for so long into a different flow and a different way of being? And this is where this transition into feminine consciousness, or this reemergence, this remembrance of feminine consciousness, and how slow she goes and how she considers and how she responds and how she intuits and how she relies on sisterhood and how she relies on her intuition and how she recognizes endurance and how important that is. It's all these really important qualities of the feminine that us women especially are seeking to access, because I'm not sure about you with your network of women around you, but I'm surrounded by extraordinary women. They really are kick-ass, legendary women. And yet so many of them are still plagued with feelings of fear and uncertainty and doubt and struggling with self-worth issues and not necessarily knowing what they're meant to be doing with their life, getting lost perhaps in their mothering journey or lost in their career and then hating themselves because they're not actually looking after their children. And, it's just women are really, really, in my experience, the women around me are extraordinary, capable, competent, amazing individuals. And yet there's this kind of veil that's still shrouding so many of them being willing and able and knowing how to step out into the fullness of their bloom and into the fullness of their potency, into the fullness of their womanhood. And that's something that, I'm deeply passionate about, is really supporting women to connect intrinsically to their worth and to their exquisiteness, and then in that connection understand how then to give themselves in service to the world or their family or their workplace or their community or whatever it is that they choose to nurture, that they know how to give themselves fully in service to what they choose, as opposed to being stuck on this conveyor belt, feeling that internal sense of disenfranchisement and misalignment and the lack of balance and the torn, guilty experience that so many women have. There's another way that we can find to reside within our day-to-day lives and within our being.
Yes. Because, Paula, we came close during the pandemic because Everybody, it was slow. Everybody was slowing down. We had to slow down. We were forced to slow down. People were looking, within themselves and really just like reflecting on moments and, time. And also, you had a lot of women, a lot of people saying, you know what, maybe no to this corporate life. Maybe I want to do this thing. And I feel like for 2020, 2021, 2022, we were there. And then 2023 came and
Yeah.
people started back doing the outside. People were back out. And now I feel like we are right back. It's pretty much like 2019 all over again. And people, like you said, have just kind of gone back into that move faster, get more, do more. We've got to beat everybody else mentality. And now it's like so many people are struggling, like you just mentioned, with like feelings of guilt. Obviously, you've got, if you're at work, especially women, if you're a working woman, if you have a family and you're feeling torn and pulled away because I need to dedicate time to being like the best career woman I could be. But then on the other hand, I need to be a good wife. I mean, I think we all struggle with that. I mean, I'm a wife and a fur mama. I don't have any children, but I have a everyday job and I have Glow Up Girl. So it's often really hard sometimes for me to like, have to figure out how do I get the balance of being able to spend time with my family and not getting off one job and then going into the next job. And eventually, I mean, I just drew a line in the sand to where I was like, you know what? Nope. On these nights, I don't do any secondary work. So I have select nights to where, and then some days, even on days sometimes where I may plan to do Glow Up Girl stuff, sometimes, I'm like, I'm tired. I don't feel like it. I want to go and sit with my husband and pup and watch a movie. And that's what I do. And I feel like for me, that's like that was a big step for me. Because I would
Yeah.
always tell myself, like, nope, you got to do it. Like, no, you can't. Like, if you don't do it, who's going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying there, Cara, just really kind of resonates because so many of us have that little death mother voice on our shoulder, like, you've got to do more. It's just not good enough. Don't you dare
Yes.
go and do that. There's this kind of like little bitch on our shoulder, really. A whip, and, in the feminine consciousness space, that little woman, that little voice is called the death mother. And it's like she is this force within us that is just very deeply rooted in the psyche, and it's very much part of our deep level of programming that we've received around oppression and suppression and repression. And if we just so happen to want to start sparking up and following our own bliss, there is this deep rooted inserted program in all of us that's like, oh no, you don't. She's like death on behalf of death. She wants like absolutely gonna whip, and
Yeah.
that's a very difficult voice. I struggled with her for a long time until I found the context within which I could work with her. And so if that voice is appearing for women, what we say with the death mother voice is that, when she comes in, you don't look her in the face. You don't look her in the eye. You don't give her the space. You hear if she comes in unconsciously, which is what she does, she will seep in through the subconscious or the unconscious. And next thing that voice will be saying, haven't done enough. Don't you dare go and sit there. You need to finish this. You're committed to doing this. All the things that she knows how to do that would work with our psyche, that would make us really want to. We have the conscious choice in the moment to say, I'm choosing not to listen, and I'm choosing not to look at you, and I'm choosing to honor the expression that's coming through me in this moment now, which is, let me go and have some good quality time with my beloved and go and let my body relax and rest. And I'm going to honor that. And it's such an incredible practice to really recognize that when we do honor ourselves in that way, and we put ourselves and that intuitive knowing within us that was choosing before the death mother walked in, to honor that part of ourselves, like that's a deep level of self-care and self-love. That's really when we're connecting and honoring ourselves in a beautiful way. Nobody else can do that for us. It's up to us to remember how to do this for ourselves. And, we know how to hold ourselves accountable to the things that we've committed to. And we know how to, and I certainly know that for me, I've realized as I've moved from that corporate world into solo and entrepreneurship, is that I'm accountable to only myself. And when I have got too much going on and I'm working too much, it's because I've taken on too much. I've created too much. And that I have it within my power to slow things down. Even if there's this momentum in me to say, oh, I've got to do more, bigger, better, faster, because that patriarchal programming is very deep in all of us. And that momentum of that wave is still in me, where suddenly I get caught up in that old way of thinking of like more, bigger, better, faster, better, carry on. And it's like, what are the practices that can stop me in that moment to bring me back into my body, to connect me to my breath, to slow me down so that I can hear myself and not be stuck in that conveyor belt, that's taking me down that old way of,
Exactly. Yeah. And I appreciate that you said, because it's not like you come to it and it's like forever, like I appreciate that you said like it can be recurring, where you can have a setback and you can find yourself in a place where you're like, well, I'm just gonna tough it out, I'm gonna do it, I gotta do it. But then being able to like recognize that you're there and to say, like you said, like to stop and to breathe and to slow down and to say like, it's okay, I can do this tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. So, Paula, you started talking about the rite of passage. So, I would love for you to talk more about your own rite of passage, if you'd like to tell us more about it as a whole and talk about what it's meant for you.
Yeah, perfect. So, rites of passage, the term rite of passage was coined by a Belgian anthropologist in 1908. And his name was Arnold van Gennep. And he explored and studied many indigenous cultures from around the world. And what he recognized was that, especially at that coming of age ceremony for children who are transitioning into young adulthood, that there was always a ritual, which is where the word rite comes from, that marked the transition, which is the passage between one stage of life to the next. The door of childhood is closing, here's this passage, and the door of young adulthood is opening. Now, what needs to happen in that passage for that transitionary stage, in order for these inevitable changes to happen in a much more conscious way? And these, and I'll talk a little bit about the elements of a rite of passage shortly, but what I want to just touch on is pointing towards the impact of the absence of healthy rites of passage in our modern day times. So we don't have we don't have any ceremonies that mark our young children transitioning into adolescence. More often than not, the youth are just being blamed and shamed and, told how terrible they are and how they're just on social media and they're just gaming and they're just this and they're that. And like, generally speaking, our youth are copying it quite a bit. It's difficult for them. And they're also growing up in unprecedented times with the technology pandemic that we've got going on, and overworked parents, and again, like, this is all just part of our collective evolution, but overworked parents, too much screen time for kids. And here we have the rising cases of mental health issues in our youth are just on a whole nother level. And at this stage, we have record-breaking numbers of young people seeking help from the internet and not from their parents or trusted guardians or other adults. So they're finding so there's a huge issue, and the impact of not having these healthy rites of passage in our modern day times for our youth is resulting in, is part of the issue that's resulting in these challenges that our youth are now facing. Now, a rite of passage doesn't necessarily need to only apply to that, although that is the most obvious. A rite of passage is a birth. Giving birth to a child is a rite of passage. It's going through something that from where one was through some kind of ritual and ceremony to another place where we are irrevocably changed. Our circumstances, it's like the Rubicon crossing that Steiner talks about, that once you're through that passage, you're not going back. Once you've had a child, you will never not be a mother again. Once you've transitioned into young adulthood, you're never going to be a child again. Once you've transitioned, there's all sorts of rites of passage that are irrevocably, that we're irrevocably changed by. And these initiation rites, because really it is an initiation, it's an initiation to mark these key stages of our lives from one stage to the next. And we get initiated into that next level of maturity, into that next stage of our being. And we've forgotten how to do this. We just kind of grow older, and we think that just because we're growing older, that we're maturing and that we're getting initiated into adulthood or into our elderhood or whatever. And it doesn't just happen. We can see that we have got a number of uninitiated leaders in our world, and we're pretty much run by a bunch of traumatized boys at the moment. It's like these uninitiated men who have been, look where the world's got to with this lack of initiation into mature adulthood. And the lack of presence of mature feminine leadership in the world. There's this huge imbalance with that. So, there is a way in which we can curate and cultivate a pathway using ceremony and ritual, using the sacred ancient practices, very simple practices, but Indigenous tribes always sat in circles and told their stories. They would sit with the elders, the adults, the youth, and the children all together. The generations of the community were always represented in the circle. And those generations, the stories were told to preserve the lineage of the culture within which they existed. They were there for the elders to tell the stories of when they were younger, so the youth could learn from the elders' journeys and the elders' successes and mistakes. They were used as an opportunity to share on our own personal narrative so that individuals within the circle could share things that were going on for themselves. And in that process of sharing and hearing oneself while being witnessed by active listening participants in the community, the individual is connecting to their own story in a way that's very profound and very unique. And the witnessing act is teaching others through that listening about things that might be relevant to them in that process. So there's so many layers. Mythology gets used a lot in circles, talking about different ancient myths and their power and their potency. And what the beauty of myths are is that we can hear the same myth over and over and over again, and every time take something different out of it based on what's relevant to our lives at that time. So this kind of place that we've got to in our world is a lot of people preaching and a lot of people bestowing wisdom and a lot of people on Instagram, doing all sorts of things. And ultimately, that's a process of people being like spoken at or told. And the same thing happens with our youth. Our youth get told what to do. They don't want to be told what to do. We're trying to connect to the intrinsic connection to these values of love that all of us resonate with. Or many of them, majority of us resonate with, balance, harmony, connection, sense of belonging, the sense of community, of feeling like we're a part of something, of offering our service to something in service of something greater. Like all of us have that. Most people, when we say, what do you want to do with your life? They say, I want to help people. I want to do this so I can help other people. Majority of people have that intrinsic connection, but the way in which we've been raised is that we just keep getting told what we should do. And really what the sacred practice of sitting in circle and telling our stories in a well-facilitated way does is it connects us to that intrinsic part of us that intuitively knows what to do. We don't need to be told it. We need to remember it through this reflective practice. And so that's a very important part of a rite of passage, as well as followed stories and circles go all the way through the rite of passage process. There's a second component of a rite of passage, which is that it always involves a challenge or an ordeal. So giving birth, it's fraught with intensity. There's a challenge involved with bringing life into this. There's a challenge involved in our ultimate rite of passage, which is our own death. and letting go. There's a challenge involved with the children transitioning into young adulthood. There's a portal that we need to go through that requires the compression of a birth canal in these transitions in order for us to be able to squeeze through and let go of the things that do not serve us anymore and emerge being able to more connected to the things that do serve us and that we can choose. And with that process, we move into the next stage, which is the possibility of visioning. So once we've gone through that kind of experiential journey that gives us the experience within which we can then feel our way into this next stage of our lives, we then have the capacity in our brain to vision into a new version of ourselves and our lives. Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? How do I want to show up for my family, my loved ones, my workplace, my community, my planet? What do I need to let go of, and what do I need to really commit to and vision for the future? Which is such a great part. And then the final stage, which I was really excited when I heard you talking about the way you lead your team, is that, the final stage of the process is what we call the honoring or the recognition of spirit. Is that once an individual's gone through a rite of passage and transition through this portal, is that they come back into the community or back into the circle, and everybody celebrates this person for the journey that they've been on and reflects back to them their unique gifts and talents that they've experienced or that they witness or that they see in the other. And with the camps that we run with parents and children, so we do a number of different camps with the Rites of Passage Institute that I facilitate, and we do sort of parent and child or mentor and child, and we've got different age groups that go through. So we've got the full rite of passage camp, which is the 14 to 17-year-olds. And then we've got kind of like precursor camps that sort of lead towards the full rite of passage camp. And we have this beautiful circle at the camp area, which is just beautifully immersed in nature. And we have a stone throne that we put each child on at the end of the camp. And each child then gets honored by either the facilitators or the other adults or the parents. And we reflect back to the child, and I'd be like, Kyra, over the course of this conversation, I've really witnessed your deep levels of care that you have for your team and how much you honor them and respect them and celebrate their successes. And I really just want to honor that capacity within you to remember how important it is that we celebrate one another in this way. And it's such a beautiful trait of yours, and that reflection then back the children feel something in that. They connect to perhaps a part of themselves that they've never even known was a part of them. And so that's kind of the full sort of process that we go through, and then we can send them out into the world with this new vision and this remembrance of who they are and this recognition of their spirit. And it's a really extraordinary process that initiates people from one stage of life into the next in a really healthy way.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree. I think that is what is missing from a lot of people, not just young people, but just people, as you mentioned, transitioning from one stage of life to the next, because it's like right now, it's like in a hurried experience. Or like it's either hurried or, like you said, it's someone talking at someone telling them to do something. So I think I know the answer, but definitely want to hear this from you. As a society, right, we're moving in this different place. You talked about a lot of the leaders we have in the world, which I definitely agree with. What will be the implications for our society as a whole if we continue to not mature or elevate ourselves to this greater degree of awareness and consciousness?
Yeah, no, I'm really, really hopeful that doesn't happen.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the trajectory is not good. With the onset of AI, and AI's got many benefits, and it's also it's wild and it's out of control and it's not governed and it's not regulated, and the implications of that on us collectively are going to be dramatic and far-reaching unless we root ourselves deeply into the recognition that we need to take the reins of this existence again in a really healthy way. And there's some very key influential, like Louis Rosenberg and Dr. Katrina Wallace and all these very influential AI people who are speaking out very strongly about the lack of governance and ethics around this artificial intelligence boom. And that feeds into the podcast, it feeds into I'm sorry, not the podcast, it feeds into the population, and it feeds into our children, and it feeds into the technology issue, and it feeds into the burgeoning lack of control and lack of attunement that we have to the way in which our future is going to unfold. And so, you know, for us collectively as a human species to collectively tune into our self-preservation, our deep-rooted self-preservation, and to remember how to connect to that, is that when we start connecting to that, we can feel what's amiss here. We can feel what's wrong. We can feel what needs to change. And, you know, for me as a woman, I identify as a woman, I worked in corporate banking for all those years. I was deemed to be a female leader. I never could answer the question for myself of what does it mean to be a female leader? Like, is it just because I'm a woman? Like, what is it that the feminine brings to the table that is so necessary and important that, you know, that diverse teams and diverse countries with diverse leadership thrive? Like, what is it that happens there? And because of my lack of initiation and remembrance of myself in feminine consciousness, I came to my adulthood and didn't have any intrinsic connection to that. So my rite of passage in adulthood, or from where I was in my late 30s to transition then through that portal into 40, was like, wow, there is a rite of passage of transition for women to go through from the maiden years of their lives into the mother years. And by mother, I don't mean biological mother. It's that one doesn't need to have one's own children to identify with that archetype. That archetype is a frequency that holds the deep mother qualities that Mother Earth has, or that the loving mother has, which is compassion, kindness, you know, deep levels of fierce, you know, protection of the tribe. If you look at like a matriarchal animal being an elephant, you know, the matriarch in a tribe of elephants looks after the whole herd, and the herd stay together for life. And that matriarch protects them. She leads with ferocity when she needs to. She nurtures, she cares for. Like there's all these elements of matriarchal nurturance and leadership that, you know, as women are being called to connect to again and called to remember. And there is this rite of passage for us to go through into our mature adulthood, as there is a rite of passage for the men to go into their mature adulthood, which involves the exploration of the ways in which patriarchy have impacted them, you know, the ways in which they've benefited, but also the ways in which they have been harmed by the patriarchy. You know, and the subsequent then outward projection that's happened under the construct that we've been living in of suppression of women and minority groups and certain cultures and genders and so on and so forth. Like, we need to turn our attention towards our own journeys of our own transition and our own orientation towards our levels of maturity, to build our capacity to be able to then unpack these little treasure chests we all have of all of our biases and all of our opinions and all of our judgments and all of the ways in which we have accumulated all of this rot inside of ourselves. And we need to go through a journey where we can go through that passage and unclip all of those things that are not in service to this world that we're trying to co-create, which is attuned to the frequency of love, balance, harmony, connection, belonging, health, well-being. All of these qualities that all of us so deeply wish and yearn for are only available to us if we are willing to do the work with ourselves, go through our necessary rite of passage, and really hunt down those patriarchal constructs within ourselves and become very deeply attuned to our own orientation, you know, move through our own biases, and then understand at that stage, through that initiation, through that portal, how we can give ourselves in service so that we don't land up with a world that is on the current trajectory that it's on, which none of us are very confident about where it's going to, you know, where it's going to land up.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, I like to be optimistic, so I'm hopeful. That's what I'll say. Okay. This has been so great. I feel so informed about things that I was not aware of, or just feel like I've learned so much today from you. And I hope that everybody else listening, watching, that you all have as well, because I think it's like, it's almost, I love the way that you talked about it. And then you also broke it down into like everyday everyday language, so that we know you can apply it to, there's not one thing I didn't hear from you today that I can't apply to like something in my everyday life. So thank you for doing that, Paula. You did talk a little bit about programs that you do offer, but can you talk about any other ways, or just how the audience can also connect to you if they want to reach out to you as well?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. I'd love to hear from anyone via my website, which is thefrequency.global, or on the Instagram handle, which is the same, thefrequency.global. I have coming out in the next couple of weeks a little short mini course, which is a 5-part series around an introduction into this transformational journey into mature adulthood. So, really beautiful, simple practices, exploring what is a rite of passage, exploring how to work with these parts of ourselves that got stuck somewhere along the line and how to bring those into wholeness. And then really looking into nature and going like, wow, how can I learn from nature? She's around me all the time. And how can I just drop in? And there's some practical meditations and worksheets that go with that. So that will be popping up. So if anybody's following my socials, you'll be able to see that coming up very soon. I also offer women, I run online Zoom circle journeys for women to transition into their full feminine maturity. So I work with 8 women at a time. I keep the container really small. I keep the circle really small, and it's a beautiful, intimate, quite a deep journey of exploration of how do we go on this rite of passage as women to transition from these maiden years of our lives where we may still be stuck in external approval or needing some kind of external validation in order to find our sense of self-worth, or we're still stuck in our fear structure, or we're afraid to step out. How do we go on a journey to transition through those sort of stuck parts of ourselves to come out on the other side and be able to show up as the mature, beautiful, powerful woman that we are in our adulthood, and understand then how to give ourselves in service, because women have got this deep connection to one another that, again, due to the construct of how we've evolved as a culture, the sisterhood has broken down quite considerably. So I do that in circle work to bring back that sense of sisterhood, to bring back that sense of connection, and to connect women to their intrinsic worth again.
Awesome. Love that. Love that. Well, we will drop all the links in the show notes as well. All right. So, Paula, thank you so much. This was so great. I really appreciated you being here and sharing that message with the audience today. And now we're going to slide into 3 things with Paula. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I always chuckle when I say that because the first one is a 2-parter. So, 1A and 1B. So, a little bonus action. But the first question is, how do you start and end the day?
So I have a awesome morning routine. I live, fortunately, 2 roads back from the beach. And so on the days that it's sunny and beautiful, I'm an early riser, so I'm up at 5:30, and I've got my beautiful drum, and I take it down to the beach, and I take my headphones, and I do my meditation practice, and then I follow it up with some drumming, and then I put my headphones on, and I dance like a crazy person with my feet in the water. And it's so funny because it's like in Byron Bay, people would walk past and go, yeah, only in Byron Bay would that sort of thing happen. But it's great. It's got these like amazing songs on, and the sun's rising over the ocean, and it's a epic start to my day. So I have a very powerful start. It sets me up really well. And then at the end of the day, I end my day off always with saying goodnight to my two children. We always sing some songs together in bed, tell a story or two. I get to spend beautiful sacred time with them. It's such a wonderful time in the evening to spend with children when they're in bed. They finished with their busyness of their day, and that's when, especially with my son, who isn't always the most clear communicator, when we get into bed at night, when he gets into bed at night and I go and say goodnight and have a lie with him, he will start sharing with me little bits and pieces that he doesn't usually talk about, or that if I asked him a question about, he wouldn't share those. Share ordinarily. So, and I ended off with that, and then I read a book. I'm not a TV watcher, so I've got lots of books that I get through in the evening before I'm in that stage of my life. I like to be asleep by 10. Speak to me in my 20s, it would have been a different conversation.
It would have been a different evening. I love that. The second question is, what's a goal or intention that you set for yourself this year? And if you don't mind sharing, where do you stand with it?
Yeah, beautiful. So a goal or intention for this year has been for me to really get myself out there and more comfortable. So just context around that is that I went off social media 10 years ago. When my son was born, I just dropped off. I canceled all my social media accounts, off Facebook, off everything. And I didn't touch social media for 10 years or 9 years. And then when I started my business, The Frequency, I'm called to go back onto social media again, because this is how to get to the people. And it's been a big journey for me to get onto that platform again and to be seen on that platform and to feel like I'm able to kind of move into that public space. So, for me, I was like, right, this is the year that I'm going to get really comfortable with putting myself out there and speaking about the message and speaking about what I've learned. And so that's been part of this, has been, connecting with beautiful podcast hosts like yourself and, finding a way to build up my confidence and build up my experience and build up my capacity to communicate this message in a really clear way. And so it's worked out well. I mean, if I look back on some of the podcasts I did at the beginning of the year, I'm a bit sort of like, a little bit all over the show there, spoke a little bit too, but, there's definitely that I look back and like, wow, there's an experiential learning that's happened. So that's something that I really value and I really recommend, is that it's only through our experiences that we can expand. And so putting ourselves out there, even if it's terrifying and even if there's all these barriers, like, just do it, because there is always going to be the gold amongst whatever's happening that we'll be able to take from it.
Yes, I love that. And last, what is a book, a podcast, or anything that you that's inspiring you in the moment?
Beautiful. Well, I've just come across a month or two ago a podcast by an American guy called Josh Schrei. It's called The Emerald, and it's extraordinary. It's mostly a solo cast, so it's mostly him researching story, myth, and history, and how we can learn from that to address the current public discourse. And cultural discourse. And the podcast is highly entertaining, and he brings some very interesting perspectives into the field in a very well articulated way. So yes, I highly recommend the Emerald podcast by Josh Schrei.
Awesome. All right, great. Thank you. All right, before I let you go, what are 3 things the audience can take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, awesome. So the first one I'd say is that, even if it feels icky, sticky, scary, challenging, there is so much to be said about consciously turning towards the parts of ourselves that we are afraid to look at and that we are afraid to address. It's in the resistance to those parts that we suffer the most. But when we choose to turn towards them consciously and address them, we go through our rite of passage into letting go of the things that are not serving us. And so, the invitation for the listeners is to, really trust yourself in your capacity to move through the parts of yourselves that are either stuck or traumatized or challenging, and build. And the second point I'd say is that in that process, build the community around yourself that you wish to reside in. If you are not in a community that is attuned to the values that you wish to be living by, then seek new communities, seek new friendships, seek new ways in which you can do that. There's people out there that are attuned to your frequency. And when you know how you want to live in the world and you start kind of really emanating that out, there will be the frequency moves in that way. Like attracts like, and you will find the people that are most suited to you. And especially for the women, like I know that there's deep sisterhood wounds around the world, and there's a lot of reasons why that's happened. But that connection to our sisterhood and the remembrance of the power of women working together with women and clapping one another up and supporting one another, and really being in each other's corners in profound ways for the good, the bad, the ugly, and all the beauty as well. Mm-hmm. There's huge potency to that. So yeah, community, and sisterhood is really important. And the last thing I'd leave you with would be is that whatever happens, so I had a little bit of an upset with my dad. My dad went into ICU a couple of months ago with a burst peptic ulcer in his stomach, and it was really touch and go over whether he was going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And he's pulled through and he's slowly recovering, which is amazing. But it's just really interesting for me in that experience when all of that was like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? Is that all the stories and all the challenges and all the beautiful parts of our relationship and challenging parts of our relationship just fell away. And what was left was just the love. Mm-hmm. And so there's this real power in remembering the love and coming back to the love, like that love that's in all of our hearts. If we can reconnect to that time and time again, regardless of what's happening on the outside. Because honestly, when all's said and done and we all leave these meat suits that we're in and this earthly plane that we're residing in, we're all returning back to love. So, to try and remember that all the time and connect to that part of ourselves that remembers love at the core is, it's a powerful practice. Just come back to the love.
Awesome. Yeah. Love that. Love that. Well, Paula, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join me for this conversation today. It's been great.
It's been awesome, Cara. Thank you so much for the good work that you do, my dear. And it's been wonderful to connect to you and your listeners. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, stay tuned, everyone. I'll be right back.